Hey, what's going on, Eagles fans, and welcome to another edition of Eagles Latest right here on FanArch. I'm your host, Cory Nidoh. Well, we've got plenty to talk about here this evening, as, of course, the biggest news that came out yesterday was the fact that the Eagles have removed Kevin Patullo from his duties as offensive coordinator. Now, Adam Schefter of ESPN initially reported that they fired him, but then other insiders like Mike Garafolo confirmed with sources that he is not fired, but in actual fact can potentially return to the staff. It will be to be determined if that is actually the case, but Kevin Patullo is beloved in that locker room. We heard it from different players. Saquon Barkley stood up for him. Jordan Mailata stood up for him the other day, and there's clearly a strong relationship with him and Nick Sirianni. We know that already. So will Kevin Patullo take a back seat and basically get demoted and just fly under the radar a little bit again, or will he look to change scenery? But I think if the option presents itself, Patullo will end up staying on staff. He obviously has a family he has to look after, and not really sure what his other coaching options would be after the struggling season he had as a first-year play caller. But nonetheless, the Eagles will have, once again, another new offensive coordinator. It will be the fifth different one in 6 seasons for Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. Of course, Jalen Hurts has had a new play caller every year of his career dating back to his college days. And that kind of brings up an interesting point as to who my 2 top candidates would be for offensive coordinator. And one of them being Brian Daboll, the former New York Giants head coach, because of his relationship with Jalen Hurts when they were together in Alabama. Daboll had a really good career as an offensive coordinator before he became the coach of the New York Giants, where obviously he struggled a bit. I don't think he was given all the best resources and the best chances with the way the Giants front office operated. I mean, they did let Saquon Barkley go. They refused to fix the turf at MetLife Stadium that cost their star wide receiver Malik Nabers the season with a torn ACL. And Daboll has a good offensive mind. I mean, this is a guy who has been credited with helping to develop Josh Allen over in Buffalo, who struggled mightily with his accuracy when he was coming out of Wyoming in the 2018 draft. And then in his third season as coordinator in 2020, Daboll helped the Bills average over 31 points a game. They made it to the AFC Championship game, and he picked up Assistant Coach of the Year honor. So this is a coach that is hungry, wants to prove himself. I thought that he was finally going to get his chance with a legit quarterback in Jackson Dart, and the Giants didn't give him a full season with their future rookie quarterback and potential future franchise quarterback. So I think Daboll could be the best suitor and candidate for the Eagles because of those reasons I mentioned. I do think my only concern is how he and Nick Sirianni would mesh or clash. You're looking at 2 very animated, fiery guys on the sideline. And I'm not saying that they can't coexist, but you got 2 guys that have a quick fuse. Things could get a little ugly on the sidelines, things could get a little tense in the locker room. But again, at the end of the day, these guys are professionals. Certainly wouldn't let that be a deciding factor to not talk to Brian Daboll, who already has a relationship with Jalen Hurts, and it would at least give Hurts some sense of continuity, even though it's been a good handful of years since they have worked together. My other top candidate for the offensive coordinator position is the former offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, and Todd Monken. The reason why I like Monken is a little different than why I like Brian Daboll. I think Daboll still has aspirations to be a head coach. I don't think Monken has that aspiration. He's a bit on the older side. He spent 3 years with the Georgia Bulldogs, so he has a connection with all those guys in the locker room on the defensive side for Philadelphia. He helped lead the Bulldogs to back-to-back championships just a few years ago. With Baltimore, he thrived. in his first season with Lamar Jackson, he helped lead Baltimore to a 13-4 record. And every offense that Monken has been able to lead since 2021, they finished in the top 10 offensively. So that is enough for me to be like, okay, this is a guy who gets it. This is a guy who understands how to call offensive plays, knows how to scheme things up. And if you compare the Ravens skill set players to the Eagles, there are some similarities, right? I think Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts are comparable. I think some would take Jalen Hurts over Jackson and vice versa. Running back is kind of a coin flip. Barkley and Henry, I think those are two interchangeable running backs. Henry might be on the inside track to a Hall of Fame induction over Barkley at this point, but two really talented backs. The biggest difference is the Eagles have a better wide receiving core than the Ravens. Obviously, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith compared to Zay Flowers, and I know they had DeAndre Hopkins and Rashad Bateman. I mean, there's a couple of guys there, but not to the caliber of Smitty and A.J. Brown. So I think that would be a wonderful fit if you're Monken. You go out of the AFC, you go to the NFC. You already have an offense that has a lot of weapons. Ideally, a better offensive line once they get healthy because they have more time now to rest after it seemed like that was one of the biggest issues for this O-line going into the year where they took a while to just finally feel themselves again, according to Jordan Mailata, with him personally speaking about himself. Cam Jurgens just never was healthy. Landon Dickerson was dealing with injuries. So I think those are my top two candidates for offensive coordinator moving forward. If you had to tell me which one I would prefer more, I think it might be Monken. I just think that could be a really nice fit, and he could be the opposite or the complementary piece, I should say, to Vic Fangio, where Fangio said it near the end of the year. He has no desire to be a head coach. He just wants to call defense, and Monken probably wants to do the same at this juncture of his career. So those are my top two candidates. There are some other great candidates to discuss as well. Josina Anderson did report that Kevin Stefanski should be getting a legitimate look along with Cliff Kingsbury. I think there's people that are maybe a little lower on Kingsbury. He did interview with the Eagles last year for the job. They ultimately went with Kellen Moore. So they didn't like Kingsbury enough to give him the job. But if you look at what he did last year, this season you can't really count because of all of the injuries Washington had. But last season, Kingsbury had that Washington offense humming. I mean, they were top 15 in a lot of key statistics, including top 6 in points per game, top 12 in passing yards per game, rushing yards per game, total yards per game. I mean, this was a really good offense a year ago for the Commanders. Of course, they rode that all the way to the NFC Championship before they got routed by the Eagles. But he did that with a mobile rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels. So he has experience working with mobile quarterbacks. He was dealing with Daniels when he was a head coach with Arizona. Obviously, he had Kyler Murray, and he was able to unlock Murray a little bit here and there and led the Cardinals to a playoff berth in one of his seasons. But I think that Kingsbury shouldn't be as low on people's list. I mean, maybe there's a lot of people that are out there that are like, no, Cliff is one of my main targets. And obviously it's all objective and what you like and what you don't like from some of these coaches. But I do think it's worth interviewing him again. I do think one of the better names that the Eagles could land, although I think it will be very unlikely, is Kevin Stefanski. This is a Philadelphia native. He was born and raised in Philly, went to St. Joe's Prep. He went to University of Penn where he played football and then got his start in the pros with the Minnesota Vikings, climbed up their coaching ladder, and then ultimately was the Cleveland Browns head coach for the last 5 years. And you might say, well, why would you want Stefanski? They never won anything in Cleveland. Their offense wasn't that good. Well, look, I mean, you go to Cleveland, you know your shelf life is short. You're going primarily to get the experience, ideally turn the team around, and oh, by the way, you make generational wealth. So, I mean, there are a lot of pros to it, even if you're going to be there for 3 to 5 years, which Stefanski capped out at 5 years. But I think that would be a cool story. I've heard and read some reports that the Eagles are seemingly very high on Stefanski, but I think he is very high on these teams with head coach vacancies to have him take over as head coach, because he's able to also draw up and call some offensive plays, and that's obviously a very attractive skill set here in the NFL. But those are two other names to watch. Again, Josina Anderson did report that the Eagles are going to take a serious look at those two as well. There's also some younger guys. A lot of people are talking about some of the coaches on the Rams staff with how good their passing offense is under Sean McVay. I think you could look that way, but I think if you're the Eagles, you really want to stay away from another first-year play caller, because we've seen what happened, right? It didn't work with Kevin Patullo. Brian Johnson wasn't great, although he was kind of the scapegoat and fell on the sword for Nick Sirianni, who ended up taking over the play calling. But I think you need an experienced play caller here moving forward, because they quite frankly squandered a Super Bowl opportunity. I mean, you have a Super Bowl offense, a Super Bowl defense, and they wasted an opportunity in this window where they want to be a dynasty. They made the Super Bowl in 2 of the last 3 seasons. They obviously won last year. They could have won against the Chiefs in their first meeting. And some people be like, oh, come on, the Eagles fans are already getting too greedy. They just won a Super Bowl. Well, when you get that taste of victory and you have 2 in essentially a 7-year, 8-year span, you want more. I mean, why wouldn't you? So I think that's why there's a lot of frustration surrounding how this season ended for the Eagles and how it really panned out, because a lot of people knew that this was an opportunity wasted with this nucleus of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, and company. So I think that they're certainly going to be smart about this decision. I don't know if they're going to rush it, but I do believe that they already sent out some feelers, maybe even late in the season, just to try and get ahead of the curve here, because they are going to be going against a lot of other needy teams looking for an offensive coordinator. Now, with that said, to put a bow on this episode, this OC dynamic is going to be very interesting, because I believe that Nick Sirianni kind of has to give up his playbook and his scheme. And I know that's going to be tough. He already gave up play calling once. That's a pretty big blow to a man's pride in this sport. But I think if you bring in a Dable or a Monken, you have to just say, hey, we are going with their playbook. And I talked about this yesterday a little bit, but I think Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, they need to evolve together, because they have been too inconsistent since they've taken over here in Philadelphia. Now, I know Jalen Hurts is one of the most polarizing players to discuss in the city, right? There's Jalen Hurts lovers that he can do no wrong, and then on the complete opposite of the spectrum, there's Jalen Hurts haters where he can't do anything right. Somewhere he falls in the middle of that, okay? You can criticize Jalen Hurts and understand that he didn't have a great year this year. He struggled at times. He felt and it looked like he was leaving the pocket earlier than he needed to be. He didn't want to run a lot more this year. And again, that's fine. He wants to make that decision because of his health. And that's a tough line to toe, because in turn, you want him to be healthy. You want him to protect himself. But also the running unlocks his passing ability and really makes it tough for opposing defenses to defend him. This year, he was more of a pass-first quarterback, and it just did not suit him well this season. Again, a lot of moving parts, a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. I'm not saying that Jalen Hurts deserves all the blame, obviously, for the offensive struggling. We've been beating the dead horse of where the blame should go around. But I thought Nick Foles made a great point yesterday on the podcast he's on, that it appears to Nick Foles that Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni, they don't have a system in place where Jalen Hurts has the autonomy to go up to the line and kill a play when needed in a must-have-it situation like they faced on that 4th and 11. And Nick Foles said, hey, when I was running offenses and my coaches were confident in me, they would go to me, what do you want to run? It wasn't the other way around where the OC would be like, okay, well, we're running this. Because they trusted Foles to see and digest this offense and then have 8 to 10 play calls where Jalen Hurts can be at the line and say, kill, 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 we're going to do something different, and find those play beaters against the defense that's being shown. So I thought that was a really interesting point by Foles. I also thought it was interesting, that video that came around where Hurts, Patullo, Sirianni, and even Tanner McKee, they were all huddled up to discuss that final play of the season. And it was totally different than the video we see and has become synonymous with Eagles lore, which was Nick Foles and Doug Peterson conversing, and Foles just goes over with a lot of confidence, says, do you want to do the Philly? And Doug Peterson says, yeah, let's do it. That was confidence. That was trust. What we saw in that huddle to close out that game was the complete opposite. Now, I'm not going to pretend and know what was said, but you could kind of look at the facial expressions. Jalen Hurts looking at Kevin Patullo, then at Nick Sirianni, kind of like, what is that what we're really going to call? And then Sirianni kind of tilts his head, and it looks like he said to Jalen, you good. Now, again, we'll probably never find out what was actually said in that conversation, but just looking at the facial expressions and body language, it didn't seem like there was a lot of confidence being shown among those 4 men. And that is what Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts need to get back to, is being confident, trusting one another, and trusting this offensive coordinator that they will call the right plays at the right time. And Jalen Hurts has to progress. There's no doubt about it. He can be a really good quarterback, right? He's won the Super Bowl MVP. He's won a Super Bowl. He's outplayed Patrick Mahomes twice in the Super Bowl, beat him in the regular season. I mean, he can find this and pull it out of him. It just needs to be on a more consistent basis. And I think that is going to be a big step for Jalen Hurts and his maturation, and it's going to be a big step for Nick Sirianni to try and help develop these plays alongside this offensive coordinator, and maybe even learn a thing or two to constantly evolve, right? I mean, Devontae Smith said earlier this week that it's been the same scheme for 4 years. Well, you can't run the same scheme for 4 years in the NFL. It's going to catch up to you, and that's certainly what happened this season. So a lot to just kind of think about there. Again, no shape or form saying that Jalen Hurts is a terrible quarterback. I'm also not saying he's the greatest to ever walk on a football field. He has his flaws, and it's okay to point them out and question if he can overcome them. He has a winning mindset, right? He idolizes Michael Jordan. He kind of has that Kobe Bryant killer instinct in him that all he does, he wants to win. Well, that could be what takes this team to the next level, is Jalen Hurts working and building a confidence and rapport with a veteran offensive coordinator who can help put Jalen in a position where he can call a handful of plays on the fly to be able to make a difference in games, and especially in big spots like we saw on Sunday. So that will just about do it for this episode of Eagles Latest. As always, I thank you so much for tuning in. There's a lot to talk about. Drop a comment below. Please let me know, who are your favorite candidates for offensive coordinator for the Eagles? Who do you want to see standing on the sideline alongside Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts when it comes to next year? And as always, please subscribe and also drop a like. We'll talk to you tomorrow as the offseason continues to roll on here in Philadelphia.